Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, sleepy journey through ancient Rome, not through its wars, not through its emperors, but through something far more fabric-heavy, the noble, burdensome, endlessly complicated toga. You're about to spend the night walking in the heavy wool folds of a Roman senator, figuring out why these guys were so weirdly obsessed with the way their togas were folded, and why messing it up could basically ruin your entire political career. You step out into the forum, the sun already too bright for comfort, and you're wearing what feels like an itchy, ankle-length curtain. It's your first day shadowing a Roman senator. You think this is going to be about oration and laws and maybe gladiator gossip, but no. Your first real lesson? How to stand without your toga unraveling like a poorly rolled burrito. And just to be clear, you probably won't survive this. Not because of the lions or barbarians, but because you're going to sweat yourself into a wool-based puddle before the morning debate begins. This thing weighs about 20 pounds and smells faintly of sheep and regret. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time you're drifting off tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing outside the Curia Julia, the Roman Senate house, trying to casually lean like a statesman while the toga's hem keeps brushing the dusty ground. A passing senator, nose high and folds tighter than your last fitted sheet, gives you the kind of glance reserved for people who eat olives off knives. There's a reason Roman senators were so obsessed with these folds. You see, in ancient Rome, your toga wasn't just clothing, it was your resume, your PR campaign, and your moral compass, all stitched invisibly into layers of fabric. The standard toga, the toga virilis, was a symbol of citizenship and masculine adulthood. Worn only by Roman male citizens, it wrapped around the body in a single, massive piece of fabric, usually about 12 to 20 feet long and several feet wide. No buttons. No pins. Just pure folding and the occasional panic-based readjustment. And it wasn't optional. If you were a senator, you wore the toga candida, a bright, chalk-whitened version that practically glowed in the Mediterranean sun, just so voters would see you coming. Which sounds nice until you realize it showed sweat stains with almost surgical precision. Now imagine it's 95 degrees, and you're late for a public debate about aqueduct repairs. You rush to the forum, toga flying behind you like a sad cape, only to arrive disheveled, asymmetrical, and gasping for breath. Your opponent, of course, arrives in a crisp, geometrically folded ensemble that makes him look like a walking Doric column. You've already lost. That's because, in the Roman imagination, the toga was more than just fabric. It was a visual representation of your discipline, your composure, and your respect for tradition. Messy folds suggested a messy soul. And in a society obsessed with outward appearances, where statues of men had idealized abs and even the coins were meticulously groomed, your toga said everything before you opened your mouth. But here's where it gets ridiculous. There was no universal agreement on how the toga should be folded. Historians still argue whether there was a truly standardized method, or whether regional variations and personal tweaks led to a never-ending cycle of toga one-upmanship. Some sources suggest a seven-fold system. Others mention a sinus, a kind of pocket-like drape in the front, handy for holding scrolls, figs, or possibly small emotional breakdowns. And the umbo, a bulge of fabric pulled from underneath and flopped over the shoulder, was supposed to add flair. Assuming it didn't flap into your soup, You sit down next to your senatorial mentor, who hisses through his teeth. Not because you sat too close. Because you've let your toga fall behind your chair, pulling like a lazy cat. He mutters that you're dishonoring the Republic, which seems a bit dramatic considering it's just wool. But then again, you're reminded that Caesar got stabbed not for tyranny, but partly for showing up to meetings dressed like he was halfway to a dinner party. Toga mistakes weren't just embarrassing, they could be interpreted as political statements. Wearing the wrong color, folding it too casually, or letting it slip off your shoulder could be read as laziness, arrogance, or even disrespect toward Rome itself. It was fashion as propaganda. Think of it like a senator today giving a speech in board shorts, except with more stabbing potential. And the really unfair part? These things didn't even have sleeves. You're expected to walk like a marble statue while constantly adjusting layers that shift with every breath. Your arms can barely move. You want to wave at a friend across the forum, but it looks more like a surrender. Still, not everyone was born into this itchy pageantry. The transition into toga-wearing adulthood was a big deal. At age 14 to 16, Roman boys underwent a toga ceremony, where they put away the stripe-trimmed toga pretexta of childhood and donned the grown-up toga virilis. It was like a bar mitzvah, a graduation, and a dry-cleaning nightmare rolled into one. The walk from your house to the forum that day would be long and awkward. People would watch. Your folds would betray you. And your mother, assuming she's the micromanaging type, would probably cry at the uneven hem. But for senators, it never stopped being a performance. Every day was a new opportunity to fold your political ambitions into 18 feet of wool. You practiced draping in front of polished bronze mirrors. You hired slaves who specialized in the art of folding. And if you couldn't get the sinus to sit right, well, maybe you weren't ready for high office. As you shuffle forward into the shadow of the curia, you realize this isn't just fashion. It's theater. It's diplomacy. It's a test. And you, my friend, have a lot of folding to do. You're standing in front of your borrowed villa mirror again, shoulders hunched, fabric in your fists. It's early morning in Rome, so early that even the doves sound tired, and you're trying to fold your toga without bursting into tears. Don't worry. You're not alone. Most Romans felt this way. It didn't always used to be this complicated. Back in the early Roman kingdom, before the whole Republic versus Empire soap opera took off, Romans wore tunics, simple, belted garments with about as much drama as a bath towel. Comfortable. Modest. Functional. But then something strange happened. Somewhere between practicality and pageantry, the toga was born. Historians still debate the exact moment when a nice woolen wrap morphed into a social straitjacket, but it likely began with early Roman nobles trying to distinguish themselves from commoners, enslaved people, and foreigners. You know, because nothing says I'm better than you like a piece of fabric that makes walking difficult. The toga, originally, was just a big rectangle. No seams. No pins. No mercy. You had to wrap it around your body just so, fold it, pleat it, drape it, while hoping it stayed put without revealing too much shin. Or worse, your knee. Imagine an ancient TikTok trend where elite Romans outdrape each other for likes and political influence. Except instead of likes, it's votes. And instead of filters, it's fullers, those bleach-stained laundromats that made your toga white enough to blind your enemies. The earliest versions of the toga were probably worn over the tunic, though sometimes alone, depending on the occasion. In funerals, you might go tunic-less, because nothing says solemn like cold knees. Over time, the toga became more ceremonial, eventually being associated almost exclusively with citizenship and upper-class male identity. This wasn't your running to the market for olives outfit. This was your I'm ready to argue about aqueducts and insult gulls uniform. And let's not forget the wool. Always wool. Even in summer. Even in the blistering heat of July. Historians agree the choice of wool was tied to ideas of Roman virtue, wool being natural, local, unpretentious. But try telling that to your back sweat. Still, early toga wearers weren't quite as tortured as the late Republican elite. Their togas were simpler, less layered, less competitive. You could wrap yourself and be done in a few minutes. Maybe not comfortably, but at least without hiring a folding consultant. But as Roman society evolved, so did the toga. The folds got more elaborate. The fabrics got heavier. And suddenly, every senator wanted his toga to say something very specific, like, I am morally upright, or I understand proper pleading ratios. Eventually, wearing it well became a form of public oratory without words. Which is ironic, really. The toga was supposed to reflect simplicity. That was the whole point. It was Roman modesty incarnate. But modesty, when put under the scrutiny of a judgmental crowd, often becomes performance. Think of it as the world's first passive-aggressive fashion trend. And it wasn't just about wearing a toga. You had to be seen in one. Public visibility mattered. Every walk to the forum was a runway. Every debate a chance to display your tightly managed woolen credibility. One sloppy corner? One shoulder too exposed? You were suddenly a man of poor character. There are even accounts of senators refolding their togas mid-speech if they felt something shift. Imagine stopping in the middle of a passionate argument about land taxes to yank fabric over your shoulder, frown, and mumble about misaligned umbos. Ancient Rome, where oration and origami met in uncomfortable matrimony. Oh, and speaking of marriage, weddings were a toga event, too. Men wore the toga pura or toga virilis, depending on their age. Women, interestingly, did not wear togas. That's a whole other story we'll get to later, but suffice it to say, if you were a woman wearing a toga in ancient Rome, people assumed you were either disgraced or in the entertainment industry. Let's circle back to the folds. Scholars argue over whether early toga wearers actually used the same complicated folding patterns we see in statuary or whether those were artistic liberties. Some believe the folds were exaggerated in marble, meant to symbolize elegance and control. Others think they reflected a real-life obsession that only intensified as Rome transitioned into a republic obsessed with mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. And yes, of course there were influencers. Famous orators like Cicero were known for their dignified togas. There are stories about how he always appeared perfectly draped, cool under pressure, even when yelling about Catilin's treachery. You imagine him in the mirror each morning, grumbling about pleats while planning rhetorical takedowns. But perhaps no one symbolized toga drama better than Cato the Younger. A man so obsessed with moral purity that he wore his toga without shoes. As a statement. That's like showing up to Congress barefoot and saying, I am honesty incarnate. People thought he was nuts. People also respected him deeply. Rome was weird like that. So here you are, finally managing something like a proper drape. The left arm is half freed. The sinus pouch isn't swallowing your elbow. You look, maybe 60% senator. You feel accomplished. You turn around, only to see your mentor frowning at your shoulder again. "It's too flat," he murmurs. "Fold it with gravitas." You nod. You don't know what that means. But you fold again. You step cautiously into the marble-clad Senate house, now feeling about 30% confident and 70% claustrophobic in wool. It's early in the day, but already the curia is buzzing with conversation, and, notably, with the faint rustle of 300 togas adjusting in unison like nervous pigeons. The air smells faintly of waxed floors, old scrolls, and just a whisper of sweat. You try to glide between the seated senators without brushing too close to anyone. One slip, one misfold that flops open like an accordion, and you'll be immortalized as that guy who flashed his calf during the grain tax debate. What you learn quickly is that in this room, every fold is political. Roman senators didn't just wear togas, they weaponized them. Much like a power suit today, a perfectly draped toga could say, "I'm serious, sober-minded, and full of Roman virtue." But here's the twist: how you wore your toga said just as much about who you supported and who you despised. Take, for example, the way senators aligned themselves physically within the curia. Conservatives might arrange their togas in a more modest, structured fashion, tight sinus, small umbo, minimal flare. Reformers? A little more drape, maybe a touch of Greek influence in the looseness. A senator might not say, "I'm anti-establishment," but he'd let his hem fall just an inch past acceptable. Scandalous stuff. And yes, there were toga scandals. Historians still argue whether the infamous Clodius Pulcher actually wore a woman's dress to sneak into a secret religious ceremony, or whether that story was just well-draped slander. But what's clear is this: violating toga norms could tank your credibility faster than a failed oration. Of course, the plebeians weren't always so interested in the sartorial struggles of the Senate. But they were keen observers. The toga, after all, was a visible marker of who belonged to the ruling class. To show up in public in an improperly maintained toga, frayed edges, dull color, askew folds, wasn't just sloppy, it was an insult to the Roman ideal of dignitas. Which leads us to the fullers. Fullers were ancient Roman laundromat workers. But instead of soap and fabric softener, they used a bubbly cocktail of water, alkaline earth, and urine. Yep. The ammonia-rich liquid gold of public latrines. You'd drop off your toga at the Phalanaka, and after a thorough stomping, literally, they'd tread on it in vats. Your toga came out stiff, white, and proudly smell neutral. Probably. Some senators had fuller loyalty, like today's loyalty to a dry cleaner who doesn't shrink your wool. They'd drop subtle hints in conversation like, "Oh yes, Cornelius, I've recently switched to the Violettina fullers. Less odor, more starch." To which Cornelius would raise one perfectly waxed eyebrow and reconsider his vote on military grain tariffs. You sit, finally, at your assigned marble bench, back straight, shoulders tight. The meeting begins. A senator rises to speak about road repairs in Cisalpine Gaul. You try to focus. But your mind keeps drifting to your toga, whether it's bunching, whether the sinus looks odd, whether your umbo is starting to wilt like a neglected lettuce. You're not alone. At any given moment, at least a dozen senators are subtly shifting, fluffing, tucking. No one wants to look obvious. The trick is to maintain a statesmanlike stillness while doing full fabric origami with one hand. That's not in the law books, it's in the culture. Some senators, especially the older, more theatrical types, had signature folds. Like a fashion icon, but dustier. There was one guy, Lucius Calpurnius Piso, famous for letting his sinus droop dramatically over one hand like he was always mourning something. Totally unnecessary, but undeniably effective. And then there's the matter of the cantabulatio. This was the elaborate draping style that developed late in the Republic and peaked under the Empire. It required taking that huge woolen sheet and wrapping it in such a way that it created a shelf-like layer across the chest. Handy for dramatic arm gestures. Unhandy for literally everything else. Some historians think this development was intentional, a way to limit hand movement so senators wouldn't flail too wildly during debates. Others believe it simply looked dignified in statuary. Either way, it turned every senator into a tightly wrapped emotional burrito with very little freedom to scratch an itch. But it wasn't all stiffness and stoicism. There were moments, especially in private conversation, where togas became tools of expression. A senator annoyed with a colleague might flick his umbo dismissively. A sly adjustment of a shoulder fold could signal boredom. There are even rumors of secret messages folded into pleats, though that might be more dramatic fiction than dusty fact. You glance over at a younger senator across the aisle. His folds are a little too crisp, a little too self-conscious. He's new. You know it. Everyone does. He shifts, trying to loosen a tight drape under his arm. His mentor nudges him with a scroll and whispers something sharp. Probably, stop fidgeting. You look like a gull on laundry day. And let's not forget footwear. While not technically part of the toga ensemble, your sandals had to match the tone of your folds. Too flashy? You're vain. Too plain? You're pretending to be modest. Some senators even coordinated their scroll cases with their toga shades, a gentle reminder that fashion politics is timeless. What's amazing is that, through all this woolly fuss, real decisions were being made. Provinces assigned. Taxes approved. Wars debated. While wrapped in 20 pounds of symbolism and discomfort. It gives you new appreciation for the phrase suffering for your country. And yet, there's beauty in it. In the slow choreography of folds, the silent dialogue of cloth. A senator's toga was never just about vanity. It was about participation in a centuries-old visual language. A wearable declaration of identity, allegiance, and personal discipline. You shift in your seat, subtly adjusting your hem. It falls cleanly this time. You don't smile, you wouldn't dare, but inside, you feel a small, smug warmth. You're starting to get the hang of it. You're walking now, well, sort of shuffling, in that dignified Roman way, the toga forcing your gait into something between a glide and a polite stagger. Your destination? The Forum. Rome's noisy, dusty, gloriously chaotic social hub. But your real objective isn't business or politics. It's observation. You're here to study the true masters of the toga game in their natural habitat. It doesn't take long before you spot them, the seasoned senators, former consuls, and silver-tongued lawyers, standing in deliberate clusters beneath the porticos. Their togas are folded like origami dreams, massive woolen structures that seem to defy both gravity and logic. And they're wearing them effortlessly, like they were born that way. Spoiler alert, they weren't. These men spent years mastering the art of toga management. Some even had professional vestitors, dressers, who helped fold and arrange their garments each morning. Imagine hiring someone just to wrap you like a ceremonial burrito every day. Now imagine being powerful enough that no one questions it. And you? You're still using that discreet tuk-tuk method when no one's looking. The great Roman speaker Quintilian once wrote that how a man wore his toga told you nearly everything you needed to know about his character. Too stiff, and he was seen as cold. Too messy, and he was clearly undisciplined. Historians still argue whether this was widely believed or just elite snobbery written down for posterity, but it definitely stuck. You pause by a fountain, pretending to admire the trickle of water as you watch a seasoned statesman pace the marble path. His sinus, remember, that's the pouch-like drape in front, is perfectly positioned to store a scroll, which he casually pulls out like it's the most natural thing in the world. You try to imagine doing the same. Your sinus, last time you checked, could barely hold a fig. Still, you're learning. One senator glances your way. You nod, minimal chin dip, nothing too eager. It's all about control. In Rome, too much enthusiasm was almost as suspicious as too much silence. You adjust your shoulder drape ever so slightly. Just enough to show the senator that you're aware of your presentation. That you care. But not too much. Because caring too much about your toga is just as bad as caring too little. It's exhausting. You pass a young tribune giving a speech on grain subsidies. He's gesturing too wildly. His toga's slipping. The umbo, remember, that's the blob of fabric at the chest, is beginning to sag dangerously toward bedsheet caught on a doorknob territory. You wince on his behalf. Everyone notices. No one says a word. You head toward the edge of the forum where a small crowd gathers around a philosopher who, in classic Greek fashion, wears a simple himation instead of a toga. It's linen. Loose. Almost breezy. You hate him instantly. He doesn't need to fold anything. He just talks, gesturing freely, unburdened by 5 meters of wool. It's the opposite of Roman formality. Yet some younger Romans admire that. Hellenistic influence was always the cool kid at Rome's party. Philosophers, poets, and even a few rogue politicians began experimenting with looser folds and less conventional draping in the late Republic. Scandalous, but stylish. This sparked what you might call the Great Toga Identity Crisis. Was Rome losing its edge by going soft and Greek? Or was a more relaxed toga the natural evolution of a republic adapting to new tastes? Some senators argued that looser togas led to looser morals. That sounds silly now, but back then, your clothing was a moral compass. Tight folds meant tight ethics. Billowy pleats. Slippery slope. Of course, there were always rebels. Julius Caesar, for one, was known to be extremely particular about his toga. He wore it with a distinct loose belt at the waist, a personal signature that made him instantly recognizable in a crowd. Some called it elegant. Others thought it was affected. Either way, it worked. He looked composed, commanding. Like someone who knew exactly where his hemline ended and his ambition began. You try to imagine doing that. Adding flair. But no. You're not ready for a signature drape. You're still working on not tripping over the back. You wander past the tabularium, Rome's archive building, and spot a pair of older senators sitting side by side on a low wall, their togas arranged like twin sculptures. Neither is speaking. They're just watching. Occasionally adjusting folds with the care of gardeners pruning topiary. This, you realize, is the toga's final form, not just a garment, but a ritual. Putting it on. Wearing it. Sitting in it without collapsing into a puddle. It's a practice in patience, discipline, and deeply repressed leg movement. But there are advantages. A well-folded toga can hide all sorts of sins, a limp, a poor posture, a twitchy hand. It offers protection, not just from the elements, but from scrutiny. You're swaddled in history, cocooned in custom. And in a city where perception is reality, that's worth a lot. You find a quiet bench in the shade of the Basilica Emilia and let your body exhale. Your shoulders drop. Your fingers rest lightly on the fabric. You feel, for the first time today, somewhat Roman. Your folds might not be perfect, but they're trying. And maybe that's enough for now. By the time you're back home, the toga has become a second skin, a very itchy, heavy, and high-maintenance skin, but a skin nonetheless. You peel it off carefully, like removing a stubborn wallpaper strip, and hang it over the polished wooden stand your servant set up. He knows not to fold it. That's your job tomorrow morning. Unless, of course, you're wealthy enough to have a vestitor, a personal dresser/fabric wizard, in which case, congratulations, you're officially a Roman success story. But tonight, you're dressing it yourself. Slowly. Mindfully. Because that's what respectable Romans do, they refold their toga after wear, making sure not to crumple the sinus or squish the umbo. And if that sounds like origami while sleep-deprived, it is. You know by now that this isn't just laundry. This is legacy. Togas were made of wool for a reason, not just because the Romans had wool in abundance, but because wool has gravitas. Linen flaps in the breeze. Silk slinks and shimmers. Wool settles. It carries weight, both literal and symbolic. And nothing makes you more aware of your life choices than standing half-naked in the atrium at dusk, rewrapping what is essentially 5 yards of socially mandated fabric origami. In the quiet of your domus, you think about how much toga maintenance mirrors Roman values. Precision. Patience. Public display. A toga isn't practical. It's not supposed to be. It's about enduring discomfort for the sake of appearance, very Roman indeed. Historians still argue whether the toga's complexity was intentional, a way of keeping the lower classes physically and symbolically outside of the elite sphere. After all, no one's winning a street brawl wrapped in 20 pounds of blanket. Nor are you easily running from debt collectors or jealous husbands. The toga slows you down, and maybe that's the point. Power, in Rome, was never about speed. You sit on a low stool beside the oil lamp, now softened by shadows. Your servant brings you a cup of diluted wine, pasca, and a fig-stuffed roll. Dinner is light, by design. You need to keep your mind clear, in case there's a sudden invitation to a late-night salon, a secret meeting, or the reading of a new will. Life in Rome doesn't stop when the sun sets, it merely shifts tones. Outside, in the alleys and colonnades, the toga is no longer the dominant outfit. The tunic reigns again, at least until sunrise. People can finally breathe. But you, proud citizen, are thinking ahead, to tomorrow, to your re-entry into public life, and most urgently, to your folds. Some Romans marked their togas with tiny stitches or folds at known points, secret cues to help rewrap them faster. Like a toga GPS. You consider doing the same. But then again, maybe it's cheating? Would Cato the Elder approve? Definitely not. Then again, Cato wore the same toga until it literally disintegrated. You're not trying to make a statement. You're just trying to not embarrass yourself at the next Senate hearing. And that's when it hits you. For all its pomp and stiffness, the toga is a masterclass in silent communication. It tells people who you are before you say a word. A highborn Roman woman wears the stola. Slaves wear tunics. Soldiers, armor. But the toga? The toga announces, I have nothing to hide, except my other hand, this scroll, and possibly a political grudge. And believe it or not, there were toga accessories. Not exactly jewelry, but items like fibulae, brooches, scroll belts, and even subtle weights sewn into hems to help folds fall correctly. Imagine a toga with performance-enhancing features. One senator was rumored to have lead pellets sewn into the back of his sinus, just to create the perfect drape. Another coated his shoulder folds with wax for extra stiffness. Was this vanity? Absolutely. Was it also brilliant? Of course. Fashion hacks existed in every era. You're not above them. You make a mental note to ask your local fuller about starching options. Not too stiff, just enough to make the sinus behave in high wind. And what about the pretexta, the white toga with the purple border? Worn by boys before manhood and magistrates during office, it was Rome's version of a political uniform. That stripe wasn't just dye. It was destiny. You remember seeing a young boy today, probably 12, maybe 13, awkwardly adjusting his tiny pretexta with both hands. He had that look, proud, confused, already tired of wool. He'll grow into it. Or he won't. Rome doesn't really wait. You recline a little deeper into your cushioned bench and let the warmth of the lamp spill across the room. The folds of the toga now rest beside you like a loyal dog, slightly wrinkled but still majestic in the glow. Tomorrow, you'll rewrap it, smooth it, and wear it like armor. Not to fight, but to appear. Because in Rome, to be seen was to survive. And to be folded properly? That was to be respected. Morning arrives in Rome not with alarm clocks, but with clanging street vendors, bleating goats, and a chorus of arguments from across the alley. You rise with a groggy stretch, eyeing the toga draped on its stand like a woolen ghost waiting for its soul. Today, you're expected at a patron's house. It's a breakfast meeting, more clientele obligation than social call. And that means one thing, your folds have to be perfect. Not good. Not passable. Perfect. You stand in front of the polished bronze mirror, the toga bunched on one arm like a theatrical curtain. First, the tunic, clean, not too long, can't have it peeking out under the hem. Then the toga, laid out like a soft trapezoid. You step into it. One toss over the left shoulder, gather the fabric under the right arm, up and across, drape the sinus over the front, and, well, something's wrong. It's slipping again. You sigh. Wool has no loyalty at 6 a.m. You try again, slower. This time, you get the umbo puffed out just enough to suggest deliberate style, not accidental lump. The sinus drapes down like a waterfall of civic virtue. You glance at the mirror. Not bad. Your toga says, I'm respectable, but approachable. Like a senator who still shops at the local forum stalls. Historians still argue whether Romans really fussed this much over daily toga folding, or if this was mostly elite posturing preserved in marble statues and snooty letters. Some believe most citizens outside the political class defaulted to simpler wraps, less formal versions of the toga, or ditched it altogether when plausible. But you? You're in the game. And the game requires folds. Down the street, Rome is already breathing steam. Bakers shout. Dogs bark. A donkey cart nearly flattens a pair of gossiping matrons in front of the baths. And there you are, gliding down the cobblestones like a wool-wrapped dignitary, watching your every step so you don't snag the hem on an amphora shard. At the patron's domus, you're ushered in with a nod. Other clients wait, lined up like toga-wearing dominoes along a sheeted atrium. The air smells faintly of honeyed bread and wet stone. Conversation is low and strategic. You sit carefully on the marble bench, adjusting your sinus so it doesn't pull like a curtain failure. You cross your legs with the kind of slow precision that says, "I am composed," rather than "Please, Jupiter, don't let this whole thing unravel." The patron finally enters. He's in a toga too, of course, but his is practically a sculpture. There's not a single out-of-place fold. He walks like the wind gently parts for him. You hate him a little. You love him more. You want to ask who folds his umbo. He starts talking business, grain shipments, a minor tax adjustment, a cousin who wants a magistracy, and the clients lean in with their best attentive yet humble expressions. You match them, while also monitoring your toga's behavior like it's a fussy baby on your lap. Then comes the moment of subtle theater. The patron laughs. Everyone chuckles. And that's your cue to lean slightly forward, one hand on the umbo, elbow flexed just enough to give your folds a jaunty ripple. A toga flourish, if you will. Did anyone notice? Probably not. But in your heart, you know, that was a professional move. After the visit, you and a few other clients make the polite post-call shuffle out into the street. Someone comments on the heat. Someone else gripes about toga season. You nod and smile, inwardly proud that your sinus didn't collapse during the whole exchange. A younger client beside you, probably on his first round of morning visits, tugs nervously at his folds. You recognize that panicked twitch, one tug too many and it all turns into a woolen avalanche. You lean slightly toward him and whisper, "Tuck under, not across." He gives you a grateful look. Mentorship achieved. You break off toward the temple of Castor and Pollux, where a small group of orators are testing their speeches. They gesticulate in time with their phrasing, careful not to throw off their toga balance. You watch one of them, a particularly animated fellow, strike a pose so bold that his umbo flaps up like a startled bird. The audience pretends not to notice, but you feel a quiet ripple of collective embarrassment. There were rules for public speaking in a toga. It wasn't just about voice, it was choreography. You had to gesture within the range of your fabric. Overextend, and you risked revealing the sweaty tunic or a hidden scroll pouch. The trick was controlled motion. You spoke with your eyes, your voice, and about 30% of your right arm. Anything more, and your toga revolted. Cicero himself was rumored to have practiced toga management for hours before debates, ensuring each fold would move with him, not against him. Some scholars even argue that certain rhetorical styles developed because of the toga's limitations. When you're wrapped like a burrito, you don't pace. You don't flail. You persuade. You sit on a low column base and watch the orators as the sun lifts higher, its light catching dust in lazy spirals. You're starting to forget that the toga is uncomfortable. In the right moment, it feels almost ceremonial. Like you're wrapped not in wool, but in tradition. And maybe that's the whole point. Morning arrives in Rome not with alarm clocks, but with clanging street vendors, bleating goats, and a chorus of arguments from across the alley. You rise with a groggy stretch, eyeing the toga draped on its stand like a woolen ghost waiting for its soul. Today, you're expected at a patron's house. It's a breakfast meeting, more clientele obligation than social call. And that means one thing, your folds have to be perfect. Not good. not passable. Perfect. You stand in front of the polished bronze mirror, the toga bunched on one arm like a theatrical curtain. First, the tunic, clean, not too long, can't have it peeking out under the hem. Then the toga, laid out like a soft trapezoid. You step into it. One toss over the left shoulder, gather the fabric under the right arm, up and across, drape the sinus over the front, and, well, something's wrong. It's slipping again. You sigh. Wool has no loyalty at 6 a.m. You try again, slower. This time, you get the umbo puffed out just enough to suggest deliberate style, not accidental lump. The sinus drapes down like a waterfall of civic virtue. You glance at the mirror. Not bad. Your toga says, I'm respectable, but approachable. Like a senator who still shops at the local forum stalls. Historians still argue whether Romans really fussed this much over daily toga folding, or if this was mostly elite posturing preserved in marble statues and snooty letters. Some believe most citizens outside the political class defaulted to simpler wraps, less formal versions of the toga, or ditched it altogether when plausible. But you? You're in the game. And the game requires folds. Down the street, Rome is already breathing steam. Bakers shout. Dogs bark. A donkey cart nearly flattens a pair of gossiping matrons in front of the baths. And there you are, gliding down the cobblestones like a wool-wrapped dignitary, watching your every step so you don't snag the hem on an amphora shard. At the patron's domus, you're ushered in with a nod. Other clients wait, lined up like toga-wearing dominoes along a sheeted atrium. The air smells faintly of honeyed bread and wet stone. Conversation is low and strategic. You sit carefully on the marble bench, adjusting your sinus so it doesn't pull like a curtain failure. You cross your legs with the kind of slow precision that says, I am composed, rather than please, Jupiter, don't let this whole thing unravel. The patron finally enters. He's in a toga too, of course, but his is practically a sculpture. There's not a single out-of-place fold. He walks like the wind gently parts for him. You hate him a little. You love him more. You want to ask who folds his umbo. He starts talking business, grain shipments, a minor tax adjustment, a cousin who wants a magistracy, and the clients lean in with their best attentive yet humble expressions. You match them, while also monitoring your toga's behavior like it's a fussy baby on your lap. Then comes the moment of subtle theater, the patron laughs. Everyone chuckles. And that's your cue to lean slightly forward, one hand on the umbo, elbow flexed just enough to give your folds a jaunty ripple. A toga flourish, if you will. Did anyone notice? Probably not. But in your heart, you know, that was a professional move. After the visit, you and a few other clients make the polite post-call shuffle out into the street. Someone comments on the heat. Someone else gripes about toga season. You nod and smile, inwardly proud that your sinus didn't collapse during the whole exchange. A younger client beside you, probably on his first round of morning visits, tugs nervously at his folds. You recognize that panicked twitch, one tug too many and it all turns into a woolen avalanche. You lean slightly toward him and whisper, tuck under, not across. He gives you a grateful look. Mentorship achieved. You break off toward the temple of Castor and Pollux, where a small group of orators are testing their speeches. They gesticulate in time with their phrasing, careful not to throw off their toga balance. You watch one of them, a particularly animated fellow, strike a pose so bold that his umbo flaps up like a startled bird. The audience pretends not to notice, but you feel a quiet ripple of collective embarrassment. There were rules for public speaking in a toga. It wasn't just about voice, it was choreography. You had to gesture within the range of your fabric. Overextend, and you risked revealing a sweaty tunic or a hidden scroll pouch. The trick was controlled motion. You spoke with your eyes, your voice, and about 30% of your right arm. Anything more, and your toga revolted. Cicero himself was rumored to have practiced toga management for hours before debates, ensuring each fold would move with him, not against him. Some scholars even argue that certain rhetorical styles developed because of the toga's limitations. When you're wrapped like a burrito, you don't pace. You don't flail. You persuade. You sit on a low column base and watch the orators as the sun lifts higher, its light catching dust in lazy spirals. You're starting to forget that the toga is uncomfortable. In the right moment, it feels almost ceremonial. Like you're wrapped not in wool, but in tradition. And maybe that's the whole point. You spend the afternoon slipping between shaded porticos and market stalls, your toga trailing just slightly too close to puddles you'd rather not think about. It's hard to feel majestic when the lower hem of your outfit is flirting with fish guts and squashed olives, but this is Rome. You carry on with dignity, even when your outfit is actively conspiring against you. You're heading to the forum. Not for a speech or a vote, but for something more pedestrian, a walk. Yes, in Rome, even walking is a public performance if you're wrapped in a toga. The way it swishes behind you, the way you adjust it mid-stride, even how much of your ankle shows, it all speaks volumes. Not about your legs, mind you, but about your self-discipline. Your respect for the Republic. And, of course, your social standing. Some say a good Roman walk is 90% attitude, 10% drapery management. But you're aware that it's more like 50-50. You pass by other men in togas, and you can't help but notice the little flourishes. Some tuck their sinus over their left elbow in a lazy loop, others let it dangle like a woolen curtain. And then there's the guy trying too hard, with folds so stiff and perfect it looks like his toga was glued into position. Probably a banker. You pause by a stall selling bronze mirrors and hand-polished grooming tools. The vendor gives you a knowing nod. He's seen the self-conscious toga adjustments before. You pretend to examine a comb while sneakily smoothing a stubborn wrinkle near your umbo. Historians still argue whether the toga's role as a status symbol reached this level of public obsession or if we're overinterpreting art and texts. But it's hard to deny how much people around you are adjusting, preening, comparing. There's a toga pecking order at work. Senators wear theirs differently than equestrians. A man recently freed from slavery might wear one too, but something about the folds gives him away. Maybe it's the hesitation, or maybe it's the wool. Freedmen often couldn't afford the good stuff. You overhear two older women murmuring about a local magistrate who dared appear with an uneven sinus at the last public feast. He's slipping, one says, while gnawing on a figure. Just like his vote count. You pass the Temple of Saturn and spot a pair of young men practicing what can only be described as competitive toga twirling. It's part duel, part dance, and all drama. They whirl and reset their folds again and again, determined to find the perfect drape that screams, "I'm a citizen and a trendsetter." One of them catches your eye and smirks. Toga envy is real. Just beyond the temple, a small gathering has formed around a statue unveiling. You squeeze in and listen as an orator delivers a predictable eulogy for a local nobleman. The speech is fine, but the real attraction is the lifelike marble rendering, complete with toga. The sculptor has managed to chisel every fold in such exaggerated precision, it looks more like a ruffled bedspread than a garment. A whispered debate breaks out near you. "That's not how the umbo should hang," someone mutters. "It's too flat." No movement. You smile. Even in death, fold criticism persists. Nearby, a young sculptor in training sketches furiously, trying to capture the way the folds cascade. You glance down at your own sinus and wonder how it would look in marble, probably more rumpled than regal. But hey, some folds are lived in. That's authenticity. You continue your walk past the law courts, where a crowd listens to a heated trial about land ownership. The lawyer, of course, is in a toga that's practically aerodynamic, its layers curve like architectural arches. He gestures so sharply that his umbo bounces with each sentence. The crowd is riveted, both by his rhetoric and his toga technique. You find a shady spot under a column and pause to rest. A few pigeons strut nearby, indifferent to political discourse or fabric symbolism. You watch them for a moment, feeling the weight of the wool on your shoulders shift. It's a good weight. A grounding one. And then you notice it, a man across the forum, his toga folded backwards. The sinus is where the umbo should be. The drape is all wrong. For a brief moment, you panic on his behalf. But he doesn't seem bothered. In fact, he's holding court with a small group, gesturing with confidence, fully owning the chaos of his toga. Maybe he's a trendsetter. Or maybe he just doesn't care. Either way, it makes you wonder, how much of the toga's mystique is about following rules, and how much is about breaking them with flair. You shift slightly on the bench, letting the folds settle into new shapes. Around you, Rome hums with life, market cries, legal arguments, flirtatious laughter drifting from sheeted arcades. The forum is a theater, and everyone here is in costume. Your role just happens to involve more wool than most. A child runs past with a stick sword, nearly clipping your foot. His mother scolds him in a sing-song voice. He's wearing a miniature toga, too short and too loose, tied with what looks like a curtain sash. It's adorable, chaotic, and slightly alarming. He's training young. You let your head tilt back, gazing up at a sky so blue it almost feels painted. Somewhere in the distance, someone is beating a rug. Or maybe a political rival, it's hard to tell in this city. You take a deep breath. Your folds are holding. The day isn't over, and already you've survived judgmental vendors, toga duels, an uneven statue, and multiple sinus critiques. That's a win. The sun begins to lean westward, its golden light slanting through the arches and porticos of the city like a gentle nudge to start winding things down, or at least think about dinner. You, however, are nowhere near finished. There's still the small matter of being seen at the public baths. And yes, that means the toga is coming off, only to be folded again. You trudge through the streets toward the baths of Agrippa, careful to avoid stepping in, well, let's call it street stew. The wind has picked up slightly, and your sinus begins to flutter like it has dreams of taking flight. You pin it down with the heel of your hand and carry on, muttering under your breath in a way that's technically still dignified. The baths are bustling. Children chase each other between columns, attendants bark orders over the splash of water, and somewhere nearby, someone is arguing very passionately about whether the fish sauce from Hispania is too smoky this season. You hand off your toga to a valet with the practiced solemnity of someone surrendering both armor and ego. He nods and immediately begins folding it, not with reverence, but with the brisk indifference of someone who's seen 1,000 togas and couldn't care less about your sinus. Now, this valet, he's a fascinating character. You watch from the side as he folds garments like a military commander maps a campaign. One tug, 2 flips, a precise bend, and the wool rectangle lies crisp and flat. There are murmurs that these valets have a secret code, folding styles that quietly broadcast their client's status through subtle layering. Whether that's true or just another forum rumor, no one really knows. Historians still argue whether valet-folded togas represented mere convenience or a quiet language of fashion among Rome's elite. You enter the baths, steam hitting your face with that thick, wet whoosh that instantly melts away the stiffness of the day. The caldarium is packed. Men lounge like sleepy seals, barely acknowledging newcomers unless there's gossip to share. You slip into the warm water with a satisfied sigh. This is the Roman equalizer. Here, togas mean nothing. Everyone is temporarily free of wool and politics. Senators and bakers alike sit in the same soup, sweating out their sins and judgments. Still, talk of folds sneaks in. You hear Flaccus tripped on his umbo outside the Senate again, someone chuckles. Went down like a felled tree. Laughter bubbles up. Even here, the toga haunts you. Once you've soaked, steamed, scraped, and cooled, it's time to re-emerge and red rape. The valet returns with your toga, somehow still warm and freshly folded, like a steamed dumpling of social expectation. You brace yourself. Wet skin and wool are not friends. The initial toss is tricky. The toga sticks where it should glide and glides where it should cling. You struggle through the layers again, left shoulder, under right arm, up and over, sinus, umbo, and something's off. It's always off. Nearby, a younger man is having a full toga meltdown. His sinus is inside out. His umbo has disappeared. He spins in place like a toga-swathed top, attracting amused glances and one pitying clap on the back. You help him reset. With slow, practiced moves, you retoss the fabric over his shoulder, anchor the base, and coax the folds into place. It's practically a sacred rite. He looks at you like you've just shown him the mysteries of the universe. You grin. Just don't sneeze. It'll all unravel. Outside the baths, the light has gone amber. You step into the cooler air, letting your folds breathe. You feel oddly buoyant, the kind of refreshed that only comes from being boiled, scrubbed, and re-wrapped like a ceremonial roast. You wander past a line of statues again, stoic men of marble in togas so immaculately rendered they put every living Roman to shame. One figure has the sinus draped in a loop that modern scholars still can't quite figure out. Some say it was a stylized affectation, others insist it's just the sculptor showing off. Maybe he just got it wrong and no one wanted to say anything. There's no way to be sure. Even artists back then argued over folds. Pliny the Elder once noted how painters struggled to capture the motion of wool, and it's easy to see why. The toga is less a garment than a performance. A mobile monument to civic virtue that turns every doorway into a stage entrance. As you pass the forum once more, you spot a pair of togaed men rehearsing senatorial greetings. One bows with a flourish so exaggerated his umbo nearly hits the floor. "Too much?" he asks. His friend nods. "You looked like you were proposing marriage to your sinus." You chuckle quietly. It's a very Roman problem. Back near your own domus, the streets are quieter. A slave lights an oil lamp near a doorway. Somewhere a lyre plays. The wool is growing heavier now as the day cools, but it's a comforting weight. You adjust one last fold and glance at your shadow, long and faint on the wall. You wonder how many people, in how many centuries, have performed this same ritual. How many folds have been fussed over? How many toga wearers have whispered to themselves, "Almost got it this time"? You step inside, ready to peel yourself out of the day's drapery. But not yet. One last stroll down the garden path, just to feel the evening breeze flutter your sinus. It's the small victories. The garden is quiet, except for the gentle gurgle of a fountain and the rustling of leaves above. You walk slowly now, your sandals brushing against pebbled paths as dusk deepens. The toga sways with your steps, less a statement and more a second skin by this point in the day. The folds have softened, loosened ever so slightly. You're no longer fighting it. You're simply existing inside it. You pause by a row of laurel bushes. The air smells faintly of rosemary and figure. From inside the house, there's the soft clatter of clay dishes being stacked and the muted thrum of household rhythms. It's tempting to go in. To strip the toga off and drape yourself across a couch with a bit of bread, a splash of wine, and absolutely no more civic engagement. But instead, you sit on a low stone bench near a vine-covered wall. The wool of your toga creases as you settle, pulling around your knees like drowsy waves. You think about your first toga. You were maybe 17. It was itchy, too big, and folded with the finesse of a dropped bedsheet. You wore it for the toga virilis ceremony, your official coming of age as a Roman citizen. The whole affair was ceremonial and a little terrifying. There had been prayers to household gods, a slightly singed offering, and a lot of nervous fidgeting while adults tried to pretend it was a very serious moment. You nearly tripped on your sinus stepping into the atrium. Your father had laughed, not unkindly, and muttered something like, "Well, at least you're not in the Senate yet." Historians still argue whether the toga virilis truly marked adulthood in practice, or whether most young men continued acting like overgrown children for a few more years. Given what you've seen in the forum, you suspect the latter. You watch a bird, a nightjar, maybe flutter down and perch briefly on the edge of the fountain before darting off again. Your eyes follow its flight, and you notice that your own folds mimic the gentle curves of its wings in rest. There's something poetic about that. Accidental, but poetic. Rome is a city of rituals. Some are sacred, others absurd, many both. And the toga? It straddles the line. It's not just a garment, it's a burden, a banner, a form of participation in the ongoing theater of Roman identity. Even in private, it's hard to forget that. You recall that bizarre moment earlier this year when a poet friend of yours insisted on hosting a salon, his word, not yours, in which everyone had to arrive in different historical toga styles. Someone showed up wearing the toga picta, usually reserved for triumphal generals. Another wore the toga pulla, the dark mourning toga, and refused to speak all night in solidarity with the fallen soul of poetry. You went home early. Still, moments like those reinforce something oddly endearing, the toga's ability to turn even casual gatherings into statements. It's not unlike modern dress codes, business casual, black tie, athleisure, except with more pleating and fewer elastic waistbands. You remember that one senator, Piso, who famously refused to wear his toga more than twice before having it cleaned. He said he could smell the judgment of the Republic in old wool. Others whispered he just had a sensitive nose. Either way, he employed an entire team of launderers just for his wardrobe. One of them, legend has it, invented a secret folding method that gave the sinus a wave-like ripple visible even from the top row of the Senate. Of course, historians still argue whether that ripple was real or just artistic embellishment from statues made after Piso's death. But that's Rome, myth and memory, forever stitched together. The bench beneath you grows cooler. You rise, stretch, and walk toward the house. The hem of your toga brushes low grass that glistens with dew. Inside, someone has lit a brazier, and warm lamplight spills out into the atrium. You enter and head straight for your sleeping quarters, the weight of the day settling into your shoulders like a cloak that goes beyond wool. The slaves have prepared your sleeping couch, and there's a small tray of grapes, cheese, and walnuts waiting beside it. You nod in thanks and wave them off with a tired but grateful smile. They've seen you like this before, creased, crumpled, and half mummified in formal wear. You begin the slow process of unwrapping yourself. It's surprisingly meditative. One shoulder revealed, then the other. The fabric slides down your arms like melting snow, reluctant in spots, too eager in others. You fold it, not perfectly, but with care. A little twist here, a lazy tuck there. It won't impress a valet, but it won't offend the household gods either. You place it on a small wooden bench, where it slumps like a retired senator. You briefly wonder if the toga dreams, if folds remember the shape of the man they embraced all day. Clad now in a simple tunic, you lie back and let the couch cradle you. Your muscles ache in that satisfying, I wore too much wool today way. Your mind, oddly, doesn't race. It just drifts, toward fountains and folds, marble ripples, whispered judgments, and fluttering birds. Outside, the cicadas begin their nightly chant. Inside, the only sound is your own slow breath and the soft rustle of your linen pillow. You close your eyes. Tomorrow will bring more walking, more folding, more judging. But tonight? You've earned the stillness. Sleep doesn't come right away, and maybe that's okay. You lie there, blinking at the ceiling, the distant sound of hooves clattering somewhere down the avenue. Rome never entirely sleeps, it just lowers its voice. Even in the quiet, there's a rhythm to the city that hums beneath your skin. And, like some stubborn habit, your thoughts drift back to togas. Not just your own, but those of others, particularly the tragic misadventures of men who never quite mastered the drape. Take poor Lentulus, for instance. A good orator, a decent enough statesman, utterly cursed by his sinus. The man's toga was always crooked. Always. No matter who helped him. Once, during a particularly serious Senate debate about grain imports, he stood to deliver his speech and accidentally flung his sinus into a nearby brazier. The wool smoldered, he panicked, and the entire debate devolved into shouts and frantic wine-dousing. It said the vote was postponed because the chamber still smelled like toasted lanolin the next day. Historians still argue whether Lentulus ever recovered from the incident politically or sartorially. Some claim he began wearing his toga shorter afterward, like a hybrid between a Roman and a weary Greek philosopher. And it wasn't just individual struggles. Entire public scandals have unfolded around togas. One infamous example, the toga shortage of 18 BCE. Augustus had just passed a slew of morality laws, leges Julii, meant to clean up Roman society, promote marriage, and discourage wild debauchery. As part of the campaign, he insisted on the renewed visibility of proper Roman dress. The result? A sudden spike in toga demand. Wool merchants hiked prices. Tailors were booked solid. Unverified rumors spread of lower-ranking citizens re-dyeing old tunics and trying to pass them off as toga virilis knockoffs. One satirical playwright even debuted a farce titled Toga. Toga. Toga, in which a humble baker tries to crash a Senate meeting dressed in a curtain. The line, "But it's beige. That counts," became a popular street joke for months. You smirk in the darkness. Beneath all the pomp and rule following, Romans were still Romans. They could worship Mars in the morning and make toga puns in the evening. Another memory surfaces, something quieter this time. You recall watching your grandfather, long ago, prepare for a civic festival. He was slow, deliberate. Each fold placed not with vanity, but reverence. There was something sacred in his process, as if the toga itself connected him to generations past. To ancestors who had worn it in peace and war, in mourning and celebration. You'd sat in the corner, barely blinking, entranced by the transformation. Not just the wool wrapping around his frame, but the man himself shifting, becoming part of something larger. He'd noticed you watching, and with a grin, said, "Every fold is a lie, child. But wear it long enough, and it becomes your truth." At the time, you didn't understand. Now, it feels truer than most of what the Senate says. Togas weren't just signs of status. They were stage costumes in a city where everyone was always performing. Every conversation, every gesture, every stroll through the forum was a tiny play. And like any actor, you needed your costume to match your part. There were stories of emperors who played with that expectation. Caligula, ever the eccentric, once issued an edict requiring senators to wear their togas backward for a week as a form of symbolic renewal. It was a disaster. No one could walk properly. Knees got tangled. Sinuses flapped in people's faces. Someone, possibly on purpose, ended up in the public fountain. Historians still argue whether Caligula meant it as satire, punishment, or just had a weird sense of humor. With him, who knows? What is clear is that Romans kept coming back to the toga not out of pure practicality, it was anything but because it defined them. Set them apart. It made them visible in the literal sense, and in the cultural one. Barbarians wore trousers. Slaves wore tunics. But a Roman citizen in his full toga? That was civilization stitched into wool. Of course, you're well aware it was never that simple. The lines blurred all the time. Freedmen wore togas to signal their new status. Ambitious provincials wrapped themselves up to impress visiting officials. And on market days, you'd always spot someone using a ragged strip of toga fabric as a belt or head wrap, practicality outweighing dignity. You sigh and stretch. Your own toga lies folded beside you now, quietly steaming its invisible thoughts. In the flicker of the oil lamp, it seems to glow faintly. As if it too remembers the laughter, the stumbles, the debates and bathhouse mishaps of the day. And through it all, you think, there is something strangely comforting in the way Rome insists on wrapping its people. Layer upon layer. Fold upon fold. A city that demands its citizens be presentable even in chaos. A place where performance is politics, and wool is law. You shift slightly on your side. The pillow is cool now. Outside, the hooves are gone, replaced by the distant bark of a street dog and the creak of cartwheels groaning somewhere in the lower quarters. Sleep tugs gently at your limbs, but your mind hums just a little longer. You picture Rome not as marble and maps, but as endless cloth being folded, worn, dragged through streets, tripped over, admired, burned, and folded again. It's almost funny, in a soft, sleepy way. That so much power, ambition, and identity could be bundled up in something that wrinkles this easily. It's the middle of the night now, or close to it, and the house has settled into the soft hush of sleeping walls. You lie still, listening to the subtle creaks of wood beams overhead and the occasional sigh of a breeze slipping through the shutters. The scent of olive oil and warm stone lingers in the air. Even your thoughts feel padded now, muffled under the woolly weight of the day just past. But, of course, your mind circles back again to the toga. Earlier today, someone in the forum made a casual joke about how senators spend more time folding wool than writing laws. It got a polite laugh. But the truth is, they're not entirely wrong. The rituals of appearance in Rome, how one folds, fastens, and flows through public space, are half the game. You could know every legal nuance of the Lex Aquilia, but if your toga is lopsided, you're a joke before you open your mouth. And this, you realize, is precisely why toga tutors existed. Yes, that was a thing. Especially in wealthier families, young Roman men often had someone, usually a trusted servant or freedman, whose sole job was to teach them how to wear, walk, and gesture in a toga without embarrassing their lineage. A toga coach. A wool whisperer. You once overheard one giving advice to a nervous teenager: don't rush the sinus. Let it hang like you're already winning the argument. Sound advice, honestly. Historians still argue whether this was a formalized practice or more of an upper-class luxury. But there's plenty of evidence in letters and jokes from the period that a certain kind of father, usually the type who paid extra for Greek tutors and Latin poets, also insisted on proper draping technique. You can imagine the scene. A boy of 15, arms outstretched like laundry, while a stern old man spins wool around him and mutters about the dignity of the Republic. Meanwhile, the boy dreams of doing anything else, racing chariots, maybe, or falling asleep in a bathhouse. But these lessons mattered. Because the toga wasn't just daily wear, it was political armor. In a world without campaign buttons, status was stitched into seams. The way you folded your sinus told everyone whether you were fresh from the countryside or practiced at speaking on the rostra. Some senators even developed signature folds. A distinctive flick here, a drape there. It was fashion as branding. One famously flamboyant statesman, Crispus the Elder, always wore his toga with the sinus looped 3 times over his left forearm, like a pastry twist. He claimed it symbolized the triple blessings of Rome. More likely, it just gave him something to fiddle with during long speeches. Naturally, others mocked him for it. A rival orator once quipped mid-debate, "Are we hearing the law or watching Crispus prepare to serve dessert?" Rome had no chill when it came to public ridicule. And yet, there was also a strange tenderness to it all. A shared language of folds and fabric. Even enemies could recognize each other's careful styling and know, at least, that they both respected the absurd ballet of citizenship. You think now of a senator you once watched helping a junior magistrate adjust his toga behind a column. No words. Just a quick fix to a dragging hem, a small nod, and a return to public life as if nothing had happened. Little kindnesses hidden in the folds. Not everyone wore the toga with ease, of course. There were always the rebels, those who rejected the woolen straitjacket entirely. Take the Stoics. Some of them deliberately wore simpler versions of the toga, or none at all, to signal their disdain for vanity and material fuss. A few even wandered barefoot in tattered cloaks, quoting Zeno while the city whispered behind their backs. Whether their togas were a rejection of fashion or just badly laundered is still a matter of scholarly debate. But the gesture mattered. In Rome, even your choice not to wear something was a kind of political speech. And let's not forget the satirists, the ones who gleefully poked holes in the toga's symbolic weight. Poets like Martial and Juvenal took aim at pompous wearers who, in their view, wrapped themselves in virtue without practicing any. Their verses often mocked senators for having spotless togas and soiled morals. You once heard someone say that Martial's pen was sharper than any gladius, and it could cut right through wool. You smile faintly at the thought. In this city, even poetry wears a blade. The lamp beside you flickers. Shadows stretch long across the ceiling. You shift, pulling your blanket higher, not unlike a new fold in a toga. The night hums softly around you, like distant applause from a silent amphitheater. Your body, tired from the day, begins to loosen at the joints. Fingers relax. Shoulders sink. But your mind lingers on something else, the future of the toga. It's easy to imagine a world, someday, where no one wears one anymore. Where linen and leather, tunics and trousers take over entirely. Where people look at statues and wonder, How did they move in that thing? Maybe they'll laugh at the sinus. Maybe they'll reinvent it. But somewhere, in some dusty room or quiet library, a historian will still argue, yes, argue, about whether a fold on a marble shoulder was intentional or just bad sculpting. And someone else will sigh and say, you had to be there. And you were. You are. And your wool remembers. Outside, the moon hangs low now, round, hazy, and sleepy itself, casting silver lines across your floor like faint brush strokes. The breeze carries hints of lavender from a neighbor's garden and the fainter scent of bread cooling somewhere near the Sabura. You haven't moved in a while. Your breathing has slowed. But the folds of history, like the folds of your toga, are still gently unspooling in your mind. And here, we drift now into the most elite and absurd rituals of Roman high fashion, competitive toga etiquette. Yes. There was such a thing. You might think that a garment with no buttons and no waistband would be hard to make pretentious, but never underestimate Roman ambition. The higher up the social ladder you climbed, the more invisible the rules became, and the more ruthless the judgments. There was the matter of fabric weight. Too thin, and you risked appearing cheap or Greek. Too thick, and it was a statement of wealth, but also made climbing stairs a sweaty endeavor. Senators with particularly thick wool often had attendants fan them discreetly in the curia, though discreetly in Rome meant while pretending the fan was part of a legal scroll. Then came wool origin. Sardinian wool was considered coarse but durable. Tarentine wool was soft and dazzlingly white. There's even a surviving letter where Pliny the Elder spends 2 paragraphs discussing toga luster. Historians still argue whether this was a serious sartorial concern or Pliny simply had a thing for fabric. But the obsession didn't stop there. Oh no. Togas also had seasons. You wore lighter weaves in the summer, though still in full drape because dignity waits for no heat wave. Winter might allow for double layering, if you were especially influential, even fur-trimmed undertunics. There are court records from a famously frigid December session in which half the Senate tried hiding hot stones in their sinuses. That lasted until a stone cracked mid-debate and flew into someone's soup. Not all toga quirks were about comfort or vanity. Many were quietly weaponized. For instance, lateness. If you arrived at an event with your toga still damp from a rush wash, people assumed you'd forgotten it and had to clean it in a panic. Stiff togas, on the other hand, implied starching, something considered vain if not done subtly. There was even a maneuver, half cloak, half humblebrag, called the regretful fold, where a senator would let part of the toga sag off one shoulder, as if to say, alas, I rose too quickly from study to fix it. You've seen this exact look dozens of times. It never fails to inspire an eye roll. And don't even get started on the seating fold. Yes, certain senators perfected how to sit so their toga folded perfectly over the knees, with the sinus poised in a subtle, artful slope over one arm. There are marble busts where this pose has been immortalized. They look serene, accomplished, like they've never once accidentally dragged their toga through a puddle. The truth, of course, is far less graceful. You remember once slipping on a particularly smooth piece of marble while wearing your formal toga. Not only did you fall, but the sinus flew dramatically over your head like a startled bird. 2 nearby senators choked trying not to laugh. One applauded. That's the thing about the toga, it turns even a simple fall into a performance. But the pageantry wasn't just self-indulgent. These layers of etiquette served a function. In a city where laws were carved in stone but reputations were made in whispers, your appearance carried more weight than any scroll. The toga said, I belong here. I know the rules. I respect the theater. Even those who mocked it, from poets to soldiers to the odd pragmatic prefect, still wore it when it counted. And when they didn't, that said something too. You once watched a provincial governor arrive at a state banquet wearing only a tunic and a thin cloak. Murmurs rippled like wind through wheat. It was a political statement, of course. He wanted to appear of the people. But his absence of folds became its own spectacle. That night, 3 jokes were made about his naked ambitions. Rome always noticed. Historians still argue whether these codes of dress were tools of social mobility or instruments of rigid hierarchy. The truth is probably both. You could fake your way into a respectable fold with charm and practice, but not forever. Eventually, the wool betrays you. You think again of your own toga, neatly folded now and resting like a sleeping animal on the low bench. It has its own moods, sometimes cooperative, sometimes belligerent. But it's yours. Familiar. A friend you argue with. There's something oddly human about it. Like Rome itself, the toga is elegant and awkward, dignified and faintly ridiculous. It demands patience, practice, and above all, the willingness to look briefly foolish in pursuit of something timeless. That's really all the Republic is, isn't it? A very long effort to keep your folds from unraveling. You smile. Your eyes grow heavy. Outside, a dove calls once from a nearby rooftop. The wind shifts, rustling a neighbor's fig tree. And from somewhere deep in the city, perhaps near the Palatine, the faintest music floats, harp strings and the soft thrum of a drum. Or maybe you're dreaming already. Your thoughts have slowed to a pleasant murmur now, like footsteps on a gravel road far away. Each image drifts in, gentle and unhurried. The air has cooled, just enough to make you burrow slightly deeper under your blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and then thinks better of it. The city rests, and so do you, almost. We've been circling the toga for some time now, examining it from every fold and hem. But here's a quiet truth: the real power of the toga wasn't in the wool or the drape. It was in what it prevented you from doing. You try running in a toga. Go on. No, wait, don't. You'll trip. And that's the point. The toga was, in many ways, an anti-action garment. It slowed you down. It kept you from sprinting, lunging, even gesturing too wildly. Wearing it forced you to move with intention, to speak in measured tones, to walk like you were already being carved into marble. In a world that prized gravitas, the aura of seriousness and calm, this was no accident. Imagine being a young senator with a fiery speech prepared, your heart pounding, ready to call for reforms or denounce a rival. But the moment you step onto the rostra, your toga shifts, and you have to pause to redrape it. Just slightly. Just enough to make you breathe, to delay, to reconsider. Some historians argue that the toga acted as a kind of psychological brake pedal. Others believe it was simply a status symbol that coincidentally made impulsive behavior harder. Still others think it was Rome's sly way of tying dignity to physical inconvenience. But whatever the reason, there was no denying the effect. You couldn't duel in a toga. You couldn't chase someone. You couldn't dance, or at least not well. You became, in essence, a citizen sculpture, elegant, ornamental, mildly itchy, and slightly constipated looking if you weren't used to the drape. There's an anecdote about Emperor Claudius, before his rule, of course, attending a public trial where his toga slipped off mid-proceedings. Mortified, he bent to retrieve it and promptly tripped over the sinus. The crowd erupted in laughter, and for weeks afterward, graffiti appeared across the city showing togas tangled around panicked stick figures. Rome never missed a meme opportunity. Still, Claudius recovered. And when he eventually rose to power, one of the first things he did was require stricter dress standards at public events, subtle revenge, perhaps, on a woolen ghost. You shift gently in bed, adjusting your sheet as if it, too, might betray your dignity. A nearby floorboard creaks, though you're not sure whether it was your foot or simply the house sighing. Togas, you're learning, are not passive garments. They demand participation. Every movement becomes a collaboration between person and fabric. And like any collaboration, it has its disagreements. There are records of Senate meetings delayed because someone's toga got caught in a doorway, or slipped from the shoulder at a dramatic moment. One senator, in a fit of rhetorical passion, stomped so hard that he yanked his own hem under his sandal and had to be helped up by a laughing crowd. They still passed the law that day, though, just with fewer illusions of grace. Even the more martial Romans struggled with their woolen obligations. Military leaders, used to tunics and armor, often found public ceremonies in full toga to be torturous. Tacitus writes that General Germanicus once gave a speech with his arm completely immobilized by a misaligned sinus, gesturing awkwardly from the elbow like a wounded chicken. This, incidentally, became a signature move for his statues. You wonder, then, whether all those carefully posed busts and friezes, so proud, so poised, are really just capturing men mid-adjustment, caught between a breath and a tug at the cloth. It makes them oddly human. And perhaps that was the point. The toga was a great equalizer. Underneath, every man struggled. Sweated. Adjusted. No matter how high you rose, you could still step on your own hem and look briefly, gloriously, like a fool. That was Rome, empire on the outside, comedy underneath. It's comforting, in a way. You think of all the tension wrapped up in daily life, expectations, performances, tiny humiliations. And you realize, it's all been done before. In wool. The toga taught patience. Stillness. The slow art of not reacting too quickly. You couldn't yank or fidget or rush. Everything had to flow, like conversation, like persuasion, like power. You've heard people say that Rome wasn't built in a day, but no one ever adds, because everyone kept stopping to fix their togas. That feels true now. The blanket over you is soft. Familiar. A little like wool, a little like history. And as you lie there, almost fully adrift, you let yourself imagine the quiet rustle of fabric in a marble hallway, the echo of sandals on stone, and the whisper of a senator folding one last edge before stepping into the forum. The stars are high now, scattered like pale coins across Rome's dark velvet sky. Somewhere beyond your window, the quiet settles thicker. The streets have gone still. Not even a mule cart stirs in the alleyways. A soft exhale of wind drifts past, like the city itself is turning over in sleep. And you, still lying still, still listening, are slowly, sweetly drifting. Let's not wake you too quickly. Let's slide, with barely a ripple, into one of the stranger toga-related corners of Roman life, the rare but magnificent world of toga accidents. You wouldn't think this needs its own category, but here we are. You see, when you wrap a large sheet of wool around your body with no pins, clasps, or buttons, chaos is always just one clumsy moment away. And Rome, bless her sandals, documented a surprising number of these moments. One of the most famous took place during a particularly blustery day at the Capitoline Games. A newly elected quaestor, nervous, proud, and standing very tall on the podium, had his entire toga flap open in the wind like a sail. What followed was part opera, part slapstick, cloth tangling around his head, sandals sliding on polished marble, one arm flailing for balance as a nearby senator spat out his wine. They called it The Day Rome Saw Too Much, and yes, it ended up in poems. It's not all farce, though. The toga had rules even in its misbehavior. For example, if your toga slipped during a funeral speech, you were expected to recover it smoothly, redrape with dignity, and never, ever acknowledge it happened. Doing so with grace was considered a mark of virtue. Doing it while tripping into a brazier? Less so. Historians still argue whether these incidents shaped public opinion or were just fuel for dinner party gossip. But they were noticed. In Rome, everything was. Even toga mishaps became metaphors. A badly draped fold? A sign of political instability. A toga stained by wine? Proof of indulgence. A perfectly balanced sinus, gently hanging over the arm without shifting? Now that was a symbol of inner discipline, never mind the 3 servants who probably arranged it behind the scenes. You recall an old senator, long retired, who swore that he could judge a man's character from how he sat down without disturbing his toga's edge. It reveals the soul, he once told you, poking your elbow with his cane. Fidgeters can't be trusted. Watch the hem. The hem tells all. The next day, you spent half an hour practicing how to sit. Of course, the toga's demands didn't end with public appearances. Even at banquets, it complicated things. Eating while wrapped in wool required a delicate balance, one wrong reach for a fig, and you might overturn a bowl or soak your hem in olive oil. A famous anecdote tells of a dinner guest whose toga caught fire from a stray candle. Instead of panicking, he slowly stood, smoothed the smoking cloth, and casually excused himself to the fountain. He returned moments later in a spare toga, and the dinner resumed without comment. That's Rome. No drama, just style. But not everyone mastered the art. There was the curious case of an aspiring philosopher who tried wearing his toga in the style of the ancient Greeks, over one shoulder, minimalist, austere. His peers were not impressed. The Senate called it undraped impudence, and a mocking caricature appeared overnight on the side of the Basilica Julia. His students laughed behind his back. He returned to the traditional folds the very next day. You shift slightly now, adjusting the sheet across your chest the way you imagine a toga might drape if it were a little less ambitious. It's warm, peaceful. You feel the softness of the fabric, the stillness of your room. You think of all those Romans, so concerned with fold and form, and wonder whether any of them just threw on a tunic at home and sighed in relief. They must have. Even Cicero, that meticulous man, likely had his moments, flinging off his public garb, rubbing his face, mumbling something unkind about wool, and pouring himself a large Falernian before settling into his writing nook. Yes, Rome had standards. But it also had corners. Hidden places. Private pauses. People who, like you, just wanted to relax. The toga, for all its grandeur, was still just fabric in the end. Woven by hands, carried by bodies, folded and refolded through countless mornings. Its story is not one of perfection, but of persistence. Of people trying their best to look composed, even when their tunic was itchy and the folds kept slipping. It's a very human story. And now, you feel it, the weight of your own day loosening, like fabric falling off the shoulder. The folds of history have wrapped around you gently, like a woolen lullaby. And all those senators, poets, and toga-wearing fools? They're fading too, retreating into marble and myth, leaving only their slow, soft footsteps behind. Just you now. And the quiet. You're almost entirely weightless now, like a ribbon floating in a column of sunlit dust. The room is still, wrapped in shadows and hush. Only the soft whir of air, perhaps from a fan or the whisper of night, keeps you tethered gently to the present. Your body lies still. Your breath is slow. The only thing still wandering is your mind, and even that is taking smaller, lazier steps. Let's take one last stroll through the folds, shall we? You remember how this all began, with an innocent question about Roman senators and their obsession with togas. A strange fixation, really, just fabric, after all. And yet, not just fabric. By now, you've seen how much more it was. As you drift through these closing moments, you find yourself standing once more among the senators. They're older than you'd imagined, quieter too. Some fidget, some meditate. Their expressions range from bored to beatific. No one's in a hurry. Not here. One man nearby gently tugs at the edge of his toga, lifting the sinus and redraping it across his forearm. Not because it slipped, no, it didn't. He does it out of habit, maybe comfort. You do the same with your blanket now, mirroring him without realizing. You've learned the toga was never about utility. It was about ritual. Rhythm. The art of becoming a particular version of yourself just by dressing the part. Historians still debate whether this emphasis on appearance hollowed the Republic's core or preserved it longer. Some believe the layers of wool hid corruption. Others think they enforced a kind of moral theater, citizens acting upright because they looked upright. And still others say it was just hot, itchy pageantry that got out of hand. All are probably a little bit right. But more than anything, the toga gave Romans something to belong to. A daily act of identity, of continuity, of shared inconvenience. In a city teetering constantly between order and chaos, the toga was an oddly stabilizing weight. Even emperors, once crowned, had to wear it. Not a crown, not a cloak, just a long rectangle of wool and a shared agreement about how to fold it. There's poetry in that. And maybe just a bit of comedy, too. You think of all the times you've put on something not because it was practical, but because it helped you feel like yourself. A shirt for confidence. A pair of socks you always wear on long days. A blanket pulled just right on nights like this. The toga was Rome's version of that comfort. And now, as the senators fade to marble once more and the cool hush of night wraps around you like fabric, you begin to understand something else. It wasn't just about the folds. It was about the slowness they demanded. You couldn't rush in a toga. You had to ease into your day. And now, you ease out of it. So rest here, traveler. You've earned it. From the wool-weaving looms to the marble Senate steps, from fashion faux pas to philosophical debates, you've walked the winding path of one strange, sleepy garment. Let it go now. Let it settle. Time to slow even your thoughts. So now, everything softens. The wool of history unravels quietly around you, one thread at a time. You no longer need to follow each detail, each senator, each ceremonial step. The folds fall away, gently and without fuss. The voices of the forum are distant echoes now, muffled, calm, more rhythm than language. You're not in ancient Rome anymore. You're in your room. You're warm. You're still. And yet, a little part of you still feels the weight of the toga, its slow, deliberate pull. A reminder to move thoughtfully. To carry your day like something carefully folded, not flung. Let that image settle in your chest, the way a senator might pause, adjust a fold, and then step forward with grace. That same rhythm can be yours now. Just slower. Your breath is even. The room around you feels heavier now, not in burden, but in comfort. Like wool pressed gently across your body. Like marble warmed by the sun. There's no more story to follow. No more senators to track. Only your own quiet and the softness of the dark. So, relax your brow. Let your jaw unclench. Let the last edge of the blanket drift across your shoulder like the final fold of a perfectly draped toga. Close your eyes if you haven't already. And drift. You're safe here. You've arrived. Sweet dreams.